Welcome to IterateUX, guys. It's Thursday meeting for weekly meeting of IterateUX, and today we will learn more about design system. And I'm Evan. As you guys know, I'm the geek of design system, right? If you guys remember that a couple of weeks ago, I was teaching you guys about how to make design system. Now it's a lot deeper than what I was teaching you guys. What I was teaching you guys was just the beginning of it. Now we have Jiri, and he will teach how to use design system to supercharge your organization and delivery process. This is very important. Like I mentioned to you guys earlier this month, right? Design system is the most thing that you need to know before you get into the job. The number one thing that you need to know before you get into the job is design system. To any company that have mature organization and the UX, they will have design system. And we've been lucky enough to have Jiri here to share his knowledge. All right, so let me give it a little bit of things, background about the IterateUX. For those of you guys who are first time IterateUX, welcome. I'm the co-founder of IterateUX, and IterateUX is community-based for all over the place, like and all over the background and all experience level. We're here to learn, grow your career, fun in a supportive environment. We have weekly event like here, like today. It's every Thursday, and soon we will have a weekly event every Wednesday too. I'm excited of that. We have a coffee chat session, design feedback, portfolio review, design challenges, whiteboard challenges, and everything here is for free. It's community based and everything is for you guys. All right. So again, let me do some housekeeping before I got fired to be from co-founder. All right. So please just mute yourself. If you have any question, just type it in the chat and we can call you out if you need anything. And then every Thursday we have weekly event like today. And again, like I mentioned again, right? On Wednesday, we possibly will have a Wednesday weekly event, but we do not know yet. Stay tuned in our Discord. Discord is everything in our platform here. So take a look at them and then be kind and have fun. All right. So for the next week, we have the second session with Jiri. So you'll dive more a bit like about design system too, like how to effectively communicate the design system with your documentation. Documentation is needed, guys. You have to know how to document things so you can hand it up your design, your awesome design with a great UX and great UI to your developer. All right. So again, this is all for free. But if you guys have a spare $1, $2, whatever, we kindly, if you can donate to us in coffee, that deeply appreciated. That we are deeply appreciated because everything here is for you guys. We not getting anything. We use all the money toward the community itself. Without further ado, Jiri, take it away, my friend.
Well, thank you everyone for joining this session. I'm fortunate enough to be here. I was actually really excited. Usually I do speak at some large events, but it is always really great to actually meet a group of people who are very excited to learn something new, who are very dedicated and are passionate about one specific topic. And it so happens that I actually like this topic very much as well, because I have started an entire company around it. My background is in engineering. It's a bit surprising that I went and started a design company. But actually, I think designers and developers have quite a lot in common, or they should have, right? And so design systems are naturally something that I was very drawn to. And I am a CEO of a company called Supernova, and we help companies to basically supercharge their design systems. And today, and in today's talk, what you will see is a little bit of theory behind design systems, what design systems actually are, and what they could be, and what they are in many cases, when you really take them to like the extreme levels, when you have the resources to just do pretty much everything in the world, right? That is, of course, not something that many people can do, but I think it is really important to know why design systems are or they exist in the first place. And actually, what was said at the beginning here is very true, that anytime you apply for a job in some larger company, you will come into touch with the design system, right? If you would start a UX work, a UI work, or even as an engineer 5 years ago, design systems would not probably be something that you would hear too much about. But alas, now with Figma pushing design systems, with InVision trying to bring design system, or at least they tried to do and bring design systems to the masses, design systems are actually quite commonplace, and it's easier every day to start with them. And so even smaller companies, not the size of Apple or something like that, but even small companies are actually having a design system, and companies like mine are trying to help them to evangelize this. Now, I was really fortunate that I have 2 hours with you, 2 sessions. So I was thinking about this, how we could do this the most efficient and best way. So for this week, we'll do just theory behind design systems, what they are, how they work, and also where can you take them. And then the next week, and I hope that you will show up, we will use all of that theory and actually create a design system. And I will try to get my company to give you all keys, so you can also play around alongside what we will be doing inside Supernova as well. Now, without further ado, let's do a presentation. I've prepared a lot of slides. A lot of them are pictures, and I hope that you will enjoy what I'm about to show you. So, interesting. Let me just share my screen again, because apparently I'm sharing one screen. So let's do this. All right. So now you can see my correct screen. And my talk is called How to Use Design Systems to Supercharge Your Organization and Delivery Processes. But really, it should be called like, what are design systems actually about, right? And how can design system look when you spend obnoxious amount of time polishing them, and when you truly go into like a complete mastery of design systems. But before we start with that, I know that you have some basics here about the design systems, but I would like to outline what a design system actually is, right? Just let's do a very quick design system one-on-one. And so what are they actually? Well, first thing that comes to your mind is that they are repositories, right? They contain styles that you can use to style your applications, your platforms. They use components. You can have assets like icons. And they are really like very sophisticated libraries that you can use and from which you can reuse the elements. They also have some boundaries. So design systems try to keep everything consistent, right? If you use design system, ideally your application across the board will all look the same. And that's actually very complicated to do, but it is something that helps you immensely. They also contain a concrete implementation of specific abstract elements that you will create. So, for example, if you create a button, the likelihood is that you also have a code representation of that button in your code base, right? And that's what makes a design system so powerful, that you have one-to-one sort of binding between design and code. And as it was mentioned, documentation is extremely important. For many people, documentation actually is a design system, right? It is something that users will be consuming. It is something that users will come to touch, and is usually your very first foray into a design systems. You will read about it, you will see what it is, and then only then you will probably dive into like Figma files or code bases and so on. And what attributes the design systems have? Well, they have processes that drive them. It's like any other product, right? And many people actually do consider design systems product. So you have processes that allow you to evolve the design system. They allow you to maybe correct some errors that will be ultimately in your design system as well. And your design system will have consumers who would be designers, and they would be developers, and in many cases they would also be product teams. So when you think about design system, it's just a product, right? And when you start thinking about this way, design systems actually become a lot more concrete than just abstract entities that are very hard to grasp. Now I would like to spend a few minutes outlining you some very cool design systems that I would wholly recommend that you go and that you visit and maybe just play around with, because some of them are also open source. So starting from those like super behemoths of design systems, one is Adobe Spectrum. Adobe is, of course, extremely well-known design company, so they should be at the forefront of what is possible with design systems, right? And if you go to their documentation side, you will see that they certainly spared no expense on creating such a design system. This design system is something to aspire to, but actually I think in many cases is complete overkill for anything smaller than Adobe, which is like 5 companies on the planet, right? And I've also outlined some things that I think are interesting about those design systems that you will see. So, for example, Adobe is very heavy on explaining you how you should work with text, which is really interesting because in many cases you think about design systems like design elements and then code, right? But design systems can take many forms. And for example, for your brand or for your marketing, it can also contain voice, how you should be communicating with people and so on. And so in here, Adobe is describing such nuances like, for example, how to use contractions, right? So in here, they show you should not be using like y'all accounts has been disabled, but rather you should spell it out and stuff like this. And there are hundreds of pages of text like this. So that's why I'm saying it's a little bit of overkill, because it is actually really hard to grasp all of that knowledge that they put into it. But alas, it is extremely interesting to see how design system can look like when you take them to extreme. Another one that I would really recommend you to go and see is Seeds from Sprout Social. Now, that design system is not that well known. However, they do have some very interesting ideas. They did create some things as a very first company ever in design systems. For example, they created health status for components. So in their components, you always know whether the component is like production ready, has some bugs or has been deprecated and so on. And every design system has taken it from them. So something again to see. And one thing that I like about this particular design system is how they use their colors and how they use their palette. It is extremely vivid color palette, and they have a lot of very interesting ideas about how color plays a critical role in how you are doing your design, right? Another one, a Salesforce Lightning, probably one that I would say most people that are dabbling in design systems will know. Salesforce is very well known for their design system, and they have recently released a new version, big overhaul and big improvement, in my opinion, over their website. So again, after the talk, I will share all the links with you. I wholly recommend that you actually go and check them out. And again, to see like something to aspire to, you can see that, for example, they even have guides as to how to do naming of the graphs, right? They go to such subtle details, and it makes sense for Salesforce because their entire business is made from graphs, basically, right? So it makes a lot of sense. But again, their design systems are something that you will usually not do too much. It is just something to be inspired about. And the last one is Shopify Polaris. Now, Shopify Polaris is a bit special because they are very heavy on tooling. And one thing that I actually like about them is that they have different types of content than you would usually find inside your design system. For example, they have sounds inside the design system. And you would say, this is clearly not a part of a design system. Like how is sound a part of a design? But actually it is part of a user experience of their platform, and therefore it belongs into the design system, because everything that touches the user experience should be there, right? So we do have one client that is very large that does sounds, and most of their platform is actually made about sound. So not only your traditional view of like design and code, but actually even different elements can be present in design system. And I'm saying this just so you know that design systems can take many forms, right? And you will think about design system differently than maybe your neighbor, but both approaches will be correct, right? Because it's just design system is very specific in their use case. Now, why are companies actually investing into design systems? This is a really interesting point that I want to drive to, because you can say, well, design systems clearly are a huge undertaking for the companies, right? And like those examples that I was giving you are years and years of work. So why would they spend time instead of focusing on actually building the products? And there are a few main areas and few topics about this. The first one, if you have a design system, it's objectively, and it was measured that it increases productivity. And why does it increase productivity? Well, imagine that you have large application, right? Just like 50 screens, and you are building a screen 25, and on screen 25, you will realize that you are building button for like 6 times. Right. And if you would be doing that, then the 5 previous buttons are actually completely useless, right? You would do well if you had just one and you could maybe style it differently for those different pages. And design systems are about that. They are about reusability. And if you can reuse something, if you are a developer, you know very well what I'm talking about, then of course you don't have to write it again, right? If you are using Figma, you also know what I'm talking about. Figma has component libraries. You create components, and so components can be then reused in different places. If you change that component, it propagates to the entire design. So design systems are basically that, but taken to extreme and combined together, right? So the reusability happens in both design and code, and it ties together very well. So it fixes some of the problems, like bugs that sort of happen when you don't create this together. Now, of course, if you go to larger companies, if you are fortunate and get work in like some funk company, right, Apple, Facebook, or something, then consistency is number one thing that everyone is pushing for. And a case to the point, you probably know Apple products very, very well, right? And if you see an Apple product, or if you see Apple website, you will immediately know that it's an Apple, because it has very consistent feeling across all the platforms. And this is only possible if you are actually very efficient in your consistency. And design systems are something that unlocks this. And I would say that they actually were made specifically to address this problem, right? And then finally, also something that if you will have your teams, you will actually deeply appreciate if you hire someone, if there will be some junior who is joining a team, you need to transfer the knowledge that was previously done to them. Right. And if you have a very large product, that knowledge transfer can take months. And frankly, you don't have a month, right? And if you hire 10 people, then you would not be doing anything else. So it's just much easier to transfer the knowledge if everything is at one place. If you have your code base, your design at one place, and everything is well documented. It takes a lot of upfront work, but in the long run, it actually helps an immense amount. So now I would like to talk about actually some like real example of how companies were thinking about design systems and why they done what they have done. And that example would be Spotify. I do use Spotify for music, have been using it for a long time. And if you did as well, what you will again probably know is that they are very consistent in their design. If you play a song in say Slack, and you use that player, it will have the very same colors as your desktop application, as your mobile application on iOS or Android, right? And the funny thing about Spotify is that they actually now have about 45 platforms that they are targeting, including some really obscure ones, like a fridge. They actually have a Spotify for smart fridge, right? So how do you keep that consistency? And it was not always like this. And I would like to read you something that their lead designer that was tasked with creating a design system actually said, I think about 8 years ago now. So he said, "Design doesn't scale" is a statement that has bothered me for the last 4 years. When I joined Spotify design system or Spotify design team in 2012, the level of inconsistency and fragmentation shocked me. Up close, the treatment of type, color, imagery, and so on, and interactions just didn't seem to align anywhere. And when I started talking about it, I realized the whole team was frustrated too. Now, I want to point out that their team at the time was 200 designers and 2,000 developers, right? So think about how many frustrated people you have and how large fragmentation you actually have when you have that scale. So they've been thinking about how to do that. But first, I want to show you what was actually state of the Spotify, because we people like to forget how bad things were before they actually got good, right? So this is the very first version of Spotify. And actually, everything that you see here on a screen is Spotify. But it looks like 5, 6 different products, right? And it's completely different from what Spotify looks like today, where you have very unified experience. And this is what the frustration stemmed from, right? There was a web team that did like a siloed web application, mobile team that was trying to maybe comply with what Apple was pushing and so on. And so just a frustration all around. And what were the problems that I think were the main ones that they identified? The first one is that all their design decisions were based on their personal opinions, right? And this is really common even today, that if you don't have a unified vision where your design should go, then everyone is sort of participating and creating something new. And if you are a startup, it is great, right? You need to get somewhere, you need to experiment and so on. But as you start to scale the company, it actually really hinders you, because the clients need to know your brand. They need to know that it's truly you. And if every presentation is very different, then of course they will not recognize you. And it really hurts, especially if you are trying to scale. Now, there were also a lot of duplicated efforts on both the design and engineering side. I was talking with one of the people who were doing audit, not in Spotify, but in some other large company. And over time, and I think it was a span of like 6 to 7 years, they accumulated 104 copies of the same button, right? So there were over 100 implementations of the same button that over time someone created. Now imagine that it's just a button, but how much time was lost recreating something so stupid as a button, right? It's just a button, but someone, and actually 106 people, had the idea of recreating it again and again and again. So this is basically also the case of Spotify, right? Maybe not to such extreme, but the duplication of effort is very common. And of course, as we have seen from the screenshot, there was just completely no consistency. Everything looked just random, and it was like if you would be using 5 different applications. So what was the solution for Shopify? Well, solution is called Glue. Again, it's a design system, and it means global language for unified experience, right? And they basically created a design language that they are using across the company, I would say to this day, with small modifications, as you will see. What they did change is that they basically maybe taken over the responsibilities of the designers and created just like a single place for all the knowledge, right? So instead of everyone participating, there was a small group of people participating, but then the larger group was basically just reusing elements and creating something cool out of those elements, because design systems are not about limits. They should not be limiting you. They should just give you guidance, so everything is consistent, everything looks the same. And one thing that is really interesting is they actually also measured like quantitative impact of their design system, right? And this is where we can truly say, like, for a company like them, they basically save about 30% of the time. And that was only with the first iteration of their design system. And that time, they measured it as a time to deliver a feature, right? Now, if you are one person, that means that for every 2 projects that you are doing as like a freelancer, for example, you could actually do another one, and you would have time just because of the time that you have saved. Now, for their company, if they have like 2,000 engineers, that means that they don't have to employ like 600 people, right? Or they can use those 600 people to actually improve platform drastically. And it's not just like efficiency that you can measure. It's also the happiness of the people, right? Because you can just do a lot more stuff in the same amount of time. You don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel. And I think it matters quite a lot if you are working, especially if you are working on just one project. If you are not doing contractual job, then I think it matters a lot that you can actually go into details, you can improve stuff, but you don't have to worry about constantly reinventing something and fighting with people about your opinions, which is also really a commonplace. And this is how Spotify looks like today, right? Or so something that you actually know probably from on top of your mind. You would immediately know that it is them. And so this shows you the power of the design system, right? If they would not have a design system, they would never be able to be consistent across so many applications. And if we then talk about the extreme spectrum, which almost no one will achieve, but they are large enough so they can do that. They are actually working on the next generation of their design system. I want to also outline some of the things that they are doing, which I find really fascinating. Now, in many cases, and especially if you start with a large company, you will see that there are a few more design systems than just one, right? Because one design system is usually, it can take you to like one product and maybe multiple platforms that you are supporting. But as long as you add a new product, or maybe you are targeting as many platforms as they do, like 45 different platforms, then you actually need to fragment that design system. And so what will happen is that usually you will have one large core design system that everyone will draw from, and then you will have a smaller design systems, and those design systems are specific in their purpose, right? So there can be like a shared library, everyone is using the same design language, but then there might be a specific one for like a smart fridge, right? Because it has a different form factor and it is vastly different from web. Or there can be one for like a calculator where you would be really limited with your input, right? It's just a few buttons and you cannot do much. So usually those like very different variations deserve a different design system. But in many cases, you will just draw from the core design system and do a small modifications. And so what they are doing is basically this. At one point, they realized that even one design system is not enough for them, that it doesn't give them enough flexibility. So they started to create this concept of like core design system and child design systems. And just to visualize you how something like this can work in a practice, you can see that at the left bottom corner, there is this one core design system that then irradiates more design systems, right? And as you go further, they are a bit different and more different than the core design system. But each one of them contains, I would say, something that I like to call a holy trinity of design systems, and that is design, code, and the documentation. You will, in every design system, no matter the size and no matter the scale, you will always have those three, because otherwise it's not a called design system, but maybe a component library or a styling library, right? Design system always has those three. So now that you have seen some real examples, I would like to talk about some levels of design systems and what is realistic to achieve, and maybe what you should be aiming for if you are thinking about design systems, right? So in my mind, there are 4 levels to design systems. One, there is no design system. And I would say this is no longer as common as people think, because even Figma, if you are starting with a component library, actually gets you to a tier 1, which would be like a component library, right? Something that you can reuse. So tier 1, basically no design system. You just start something random. You don't have anything that you can reuse. Tier 1 is where you have a component library. So you have some components that you are reusing. Maybe you have those components on a code site as well. It is not a rule that you will have both. In fact, I know a lot of companies who are very happy to have just a component library inside their code base and don't have any representation of it inside the design, but it will not take you to scale. It's actually very difficult to maintain those if they are not in sync and if they are not connected together in any way. And so this brings me to basically a tier 2, which is where the design system serves as like a cross-functional source of truth, right? So you have your design, you have your code, there is some interconnection between them, and you have some rule that governs the design system. And then finally, tier 3 is something that is common in large companies, where most of the design decisions are actually made out of the design system, right? And this is at the point where design system is sufficiently large that almost all answers can be taken from the design system, but it requires quite a lot of work. And so we will touch it at the end. I think what is realistic is to get to like tier 2, where you actually work alongside your developer, alongside your designer, if you are a developer, and you are building something really cool together that will ultimately help you quite a bit. So let's talk a little bit more about each of those tiers, and I will give you some examples of what I mean by that. And again, I'm saying this all. So for the next week, you know what we will actually be creating. And as I said, this is very much about the theory. I will share all of this with you. But then next week, we will actually try to create a tier 2 design system where you can work with your designers, where you can work with your developers, and it will feel much more efficient than what you are doing today. So how the company without the design system look like? Well, all of your decisions that you will be doing will be based on feelings and opinions, right? If I say this rectangle looks good, it should have rounded corners, is equally as valid as if you say it should not have rounded corners, because there is no consensus between us. And there was no one who said, this is how we will be guiding the company forward, right? So not having a design system, you will quickly get into a lot of clashes. And the more people you have, the more unmaintainable this is, right? Because you know how it is, just 2 people and there are different opinions. But imagine that you have 10 people, then it becomes a big problem. Of course, most of the product features, if you don't have a design system, are created as like a siloed elements, right? They are created separately. And this presents challenges like what I was saying, that you can have like 100 buttons recreated again and again and again, because there is just no reuse. And connected to this, there is of course a lot of duplication of efforts. There is almost no effort to reuse, so all the effort is actually creating again and again. You will see a duplication as one of the critical points why design systems exist in the first place, and a lot of that can be boiled down to duplication. And I don't want to say that not having a design system is a bad choice, because there are some examples of projects where it makes sense. Design system is a work, right? And you have to put that work up front, so it pays you long term. But for short-term projects, you usually cannot do that. And so it, of course, doesn't make sense to apply it everywhere. As with everything, is tool that should be used when it's appropriate. But if you are building a project that should stay with you long-term, it is definitely a better choice to start with design system than to do it maybe later, because that part is really hard, like auditing and getting a design system up and running. If you already have something, this is really hard. There is a side note that I put. It's not true for agencies. I actually work with a lot of agencies, and they do have design systems. And if you are agency, design systems can help you greatly, because actually you can just reskin your work and resell it again, right? And many companies are doing that, surprisingly, and it's a good business. So if you are agency, design system, great choice, but it has its difficulties. Now, one graph that I wanted to show you is basically a cost of development versus the time that you spent on a project, right? And if you look at the red line, then this is a without design system. So as you can see at the beginning, it is actually cheaper to build your project if it's very short term, right? But as you can see, the expense increases. Actually, I think this graph is a little bit incorrect, because the increase is not linear, it is exponential, because the exponentiality comes from the maintenance costs, right? As the project grows larger, the maintenance actually also takes a big part of your day-to-day work. But you still need to be adding features, right? So you are ramping up the development and design. But actually, if you use design system and if you spend the time, then you can see that you have a bit more upfront work. In many cases, it can be quite a lot of work. And this is something that has to be taken into consideration. But at one point, you can see that there is this inflection where actually the costs will drop, because you are now reusing almost everything that you are doing. And so the added costs that you are incurring are mostly about like maintenance of the product, maintenance of the design system, and evolving that design system, right? But it never happens that it would like skyrocket, which in a projects without design system happens very often. So then you know that design systems in many cases are a good idea. And of course, again, it's about your judgment whether you think it's right for you or not. Now, what is the tier one? If you are thinking about design systems, maybe starting to think about it, and I would actually maybe guess that one of your previous lessons about design systems were actually about tier one design system, where you are thinking about like reusing some elements inside Figma, right? Maybe you are creating some basic styles that you can use. Maybe it all interconnects together. This would be, in my opinion, tier one design system, but many people call it component library. I think it's almost the same. Now, the difference is that what you are doing is siloed, but it's shared across the entire department, right? So in the previous version, you have been basically working alone, but now you are working on something coherent, but only in your department. So like all designers form a team, all developers form a team, and they contribute to one single place. But there is no interconnection between those groups, and this is what differentiates it from the next level of the design system. Now, all tools nowadays, or most of them anyway, are sort of pushing you to this tier one design system, right? Because they all help you create those siloed libraries. In Figma, you create a design library, but the connection to code is almost non-existent. In Storybook, you create a design library, code library for React, for example, but the connection to design is almost non-existent, right? And all of this is quite bad, but of course it can work. And one of the difficulties of this, and this is sort of a trap that I feel everyone is falling into, is that for a long time, this approach actually works for people, right? Because you feel like I'm creating something really consistent and my teams are actually benefiting from it. But if you analyze it, you will see that this disparity between the design and development team is actually hurting you quite a bit more than you are expecting. And it takes a long time before people realize this. If they previously worked with the design system, it's not such a case. But this is a very difficult moment to get from. And this is how a tier 1 design system can look like, right? So you have some components, some library that you will use, and maybe you can some globally style it, and you will probably have 2 variations of it, one on the design side, one on the code side. Now, going further to a tier 2 design system is where you create the intricate connections between those elements, right? So if you are contributing something to a design system, you will not actually create a design component, but rather there will be designer and developer working together on creating like a unified interface for your component, for example, for a button. And developer will say, we will be able to do this with this button, right? And you will say, okay, it will look like this in those particular states. And when you have this connection between the teams, then it starts to make sense to have a design system. It starts to be also very easy to implement stuff out of the design system, because you can be sure that if you put as a designer a button into your Figma, that button will actually do completely the same what you are envisioning in that code base, right? But previously that was not possible because there could have been some different button, something very, very disconnected that you haven't validated in the first place. And again, that happens very often. One difference that is there between the tier 1 and tier 2 is that this is where you would have a documentation in place. This is where you would create the unified interface for your components, for how you should use colors, maybe some guidance about how people should be using the design system, what are the limitations, and so on. And it is also the first point where I think companies start to think about how investing into design systems is a good choice, right? So very likely you will have a dedicated, at least a team member. Maybe it will not be a full-time position, but someone who is just dedicated to contributing to a design system, maybe getting your requests and so on. It will be also the first place where you will start with the processes for the design system. But I do think that at this point, you need to have someone who is maintaining that. And actually, I think a skill of maintaining design system is something that will take you a long way. Like I know, so we are hiring quite a lot into our company. We have interviewed literally over 100 UX developers or designers, and we just don't want to talk with people who don't understand this part, right? And it's not like a snobbery or something. We just know that because we are a design system tool, it will not help us much. But I think it's a very critical skill because it helps you to think about what you are doing in much more sophisticated ways. So I would recommend you that you actually spend some time like understanding how design systems are maintained, how they are created, and how you can become, that person. It is also, by the way, extremely well-paid job if you actually become a design system maintainer, if you would like to go in that direction. And this could be a tier 2 representation of a design system. So now you can see we have a documentation, and in the documentation, we have some use cases of, say, a button, right? And how to use it and so on. So there is quite a lot that goes into it already. But if you have very good tooling, it's actually not very hard to make that, because you can just pull that information from a different sources, and that tooling will do it for you. And in the long run, it will help you quite a bit. And in the next week, together, we will build something like this. We will build a documentation that pulls from Storybook and Figma, and that will be updating itself automatically. And I think then you will see that it's just actually not such a huge undertaking to start with the design system. And now finally, tier 3, something that you will only really achieve if you put an insane amount of resources, because the jump between like tier 2 and tier 3 of the design system is actually quite drastic. All of those that I was I was showing you, the design systems, were mostly the tier 3 design systems. So all the decisions that you do about the product are driven by the design system, right? It's not a decision in terms of like where do you strategically go with the design system, with the design or with the product itself. But if you say, I want a new feature, then you will immediately know how that feature should look like. In many cases, in many design systems, they are so extensive that they actually allow you to live prototype the app, and you can combine it with like live elements, and you will almost have the entire application done, right? So it's very cool, requires a lot of work. One significant difference is that the tier 3 design systems are usually very automated. It is really important on scale to start with the automation, because, for example, let's say something really, really easy, like what you are doing every day. You create an icon, and now you need to get that icon to your developers, right? But imagine that you are something like Shopify or Adobe. You have literally dozens of products, so every icon needs to be present in all the products. And how do you distribute that, right? And now every icon needs to be different. Something is using SVG, something is using PNG, something may be using font of the icons, and all of this needs to be maintained somehow. So it's just like publishing one icon becomes a huge burden. And for all of this, you will introduce automations. And the current state of design systems is that companies actually tend to create a lot of those tools themselves, because so far there are almost no vendors that would help them with something like this, especially on scale. But next week, I will actually show you how you can even automate something like this a little bit at least. And this is really useful even if you don't have a sophisticated design system. I cannot tell you how in my career, how much or how many icons I have actually exported as a developer to my code base. If I would automate all of this, I would definitely save at least like a week of my life. And that counts at the end. So, as I was saying, one of the examples would, for example, be this. It's very consistent. It took forever, but certainly now they are saving literally hundreds of millions of dollars in design and development costs. And so one last thing that I would like to talk before we get to QA and talk maybe a little bit more about some nuances. What do all the great design systems have in common? Right? And there are 4 main categories that you can go into. So the first one is that each design system on scale will have a good foundation. You will think and you will start with a design system from like styles, right? Or from components and so on. And that's completely fine because you don't have to have refined foundations, like, for example, Adobe Spectrum, where you have all the writing guides and so on. But as you get on scale, it actually makes a lot of sense because even the design system needs to be built on top of something, right? And in the same way as you don't build a house without like the base concrete, you actually cannot build a design system without those grounding rules. And so in those large design systems, you will actually see that there is a lot that goes into just thinking about how it is done and what boundaries the design system have. Now, there are also processes that govern the design system, right? So if you want to contribute, if you want to report a bug, if you want to improve something, if whatever, as the same, it is the same as if you would be creating any other product, then those are in place. And if you start building a design system, it is really good to think about this. You don't have to necessarily implement it, but it's very good to think about like, hey, if I have a request from my developer, what will I actually do? Do I just go to Figma and start drawing something? Or will we talk about this? Will we maybe define an interface for how the component should look like, right? How do I introduce a new color? All of this is more like a mental model that you are creating rather than anything else. But in the long run, helps you to be much better designer, much better developer even. And there is also a decision guidance for common tasks. There are so many common tasks that you are doing every day. Just like completely, if you think about what you are doing, just focus on this and you will understand what I mean by that. There is a lot of repetition in your day-to-day work. And for all of those decisions that you have to make on an ongoing basis in a design system like this, there would be answer for you. So you don't have to think about every single thing that you are doing, but you are more like a Lego builder, right? Not to say that you cannot create anything new with the design system. This is not their purpose, but you are always guided. And so your work is in general much better. And one thing that I wanted to drive this point home, in some very mature design systems, those rules can be very absurd. Like, for example, I think this is Atlassian design system. They even have a section that tells you, like, don't use generic titles for your menus, right? And this is very interesting because you never think about stuff like this. But actually, if you would do it the other way, that they sort of tell you not to do that, then if they care about the UX design, they would actually return it back to you and say, do it differently because it doesn't align with our rules, right? And this presents inefficiency because those cycles of like back and forth are really long in those companies. Now, the second part of 4 is you would have a generic, scalable, and themeable styling system. You have probably created a few styles before. I assume it is always a part of a design system, but those design systems definitely have their rules, and everything sort of revolves around your color palettes, around the typographies, and so on, right? So you would have like a very complete set of those rules spanning colors, but maybe also spacings. How do you do motion, maybe animations, and so on. All of this belongs to a design system and can go to extremes like sound even. And probably something that you are struggling with as well. Usually those design systems support themes. Switching between light and dark mode is one of the most difficult parts of a design system in general, and making it correct, or be it correct, actually helps you quite a bit. We do have support for multiple brands in Supernova, for example. And the reason why we do this is that there are companies out there who have, like, say, 16 brands. Right? We have some Australian company who has 16 brands. And how do you even manage something like this? You have like 16 duplicates of something. And then if you need to change something, you need to change it on 16 places. That's very unlikely. So thinking about how your design system supports this really helps you go a long way. And this is one of the examples how it can look like. And of course, you will also have a asset library, resource library, your fonts, your icons, everything. We don't have to spend any time on this. You know all what I mean by that, but it is a natural part of a design system, something that grows over time. And I'm getting to an end, but in here, we have an example of what design system can contain, right? So some icons, something that you can use inside your design, and then also guides as to how to use that. And finally, it will contain a not limiting component library, right? So it will have basic elements, basic components that you can use and that you can build some extra, more sophisticated elements out of it. And a good example would be, like, I have an image and I have a button and I have a menu icon, and I can make a profile header out of something like this, right? But that profile header can look 10 different ways, but it will still feel like my product because I'm using those base concrete elements. And one thing that is really important is that it works really well with the styling library. right? So the styling drives the look and feel of those components. And if you change your primary color, then everything gets restyled automatically. This is one of the magical moments of a design system where you get to this rework and actually everything can be parameterized. You just play around with it and like thousands of components are changed. And again, this is one of the examples how it can look like. And then finally, something that we will explore this week, my last slide, is you also need for a design system a solid management and delivery toolchains. Now, right now you are using just Figma, maybe you are using Storybook if you are a developer, maybe you are using Git and so on. But if you go to any more sophisticated and large design system, then you need tools from 4 categories. The first one is to manage your processes. So you will start thinking about design system as the very same process as your product. You will also need something that manages all of those entities. So code, design, and all of this in one place. And you need a documentation editor. And whether that is a Notion or our platform or Zero Height on some other platform, doesn't matter. You will have, however, a documentation. And finally, something that is a bit optional, but you will find it very interesting next week, is if you also sprinkle it with a little bit of automation, that helps a long way, because design systems can feel like a very daunting task. Everything that you can automate actually helps quite a bit. And with that, I would like to thank you for this time for this presentation. I was very much focused on the theory today, and I would like to have a little bit of QA if you have a little bit more time. But next week, we'll do a very practical session. I will try to give you all access to Supernova, which is a management tool for a design system. I will share a design system library with you, both from the design and the code side. And now we can play around with it, and you will probably get out of it with a documentation. Then you can then show your friends, I've made my first coherent design system. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I hope that you have enjoyed it.
Hey everyone, on behalf of IterateUX, we would like to thank you so much for watching this week's event. If you like the content, please leave a like and subscribe. We'll have events every Thursday at 5:30 Pacific Time. Join our Discord in the description to find out more.